Okay, so to start the Dharma talk, the Dharma study group, I'd like to ring this bell. It's going to go to silence, and so too will we. We're going to sit in quiet for several minutes together. And tonight when we sit in quiet, I'm going to ask you to imagine yourself as Arjuna and his brothers experienced this specific slice of time in their life. And that event is, they had many years prior lost the kingdom, their kingdom, to a gambling match to their cousins. So in this unfortunate gambling event, they lost the kingdom as it was known. That's called the Dharma. The Dharma means the wisdom teachings, or your Dharma, your purpose, that which is righteous or wise or sacred. They lost the kingdom, essentially. And because of that, they were sent into exile in the forest for many years. And while they were off in exile, they studied. They deepened their commitment to yoga and to the knowledge of life. And then it was time for them to come back into the community, and what they came back to see was the prevalence of adharma, means the absence of dharma. So they came back to a kingdom that was being ruled by their cousins, their brothers across the battlefield, and was being led by adharma, the absence of dharma. This is really important to consider. For example, if you've ever gone away yourself on retreat and then come back home to see that the house is messy, or the dishes weren't done, or you came back into the urban world and you felt overwhelmed, did you ever have distress upon coming home from retreat? Or maybe just leaving yoga class and going back out into the world at large. So we have these mini retreats like yoga class or a time out or a good night's sleep and some time in the garden. And then we walk back into what looks like messy humanity. Or you come home from retreat and you had hoped the dishes would be done, but they weren't. And if you experienced a meltdown when you saw that the dishes weren't done, you can understand the meltdown that Arjuna and his brothers are about to feel. For they've been off studying, and they had lost the kingdom, which was very unfortunate, so that when they came back, they saw a kingdom led by the 99 ways in which the human mind goes out of balance. It was being compelled by those 99 factors, which are the cousins and brothers across the field. The 100th person across the field represents the urge to do psychological battle. You ever have that urge? Internally or externally? So when we sit quietly, you can reflect on what that transition might have been like for Arjuna and his brothers, and or how you might yourself experience that transition. Arjuna is about to get teachings from his teacher that could help him with this despondency that he feels in the face of that realization that they lost the kingdom and look what happened. So I'm going to ring the bell. We'll go to silence. As we sit quietly, then I welcome you to soften your heart to the natural moments of despair when your human heart meets up with adharma and the battle, the so-called battle for dharma. Perhaps sometimes this battle, this quote-unquote battle, arises in your life when you have clear insight and even clear intention, but your actions don't line up with that. Invite your heart to soften towards that as well. And perhaps sometimes this battle, this quote-unquote battle, you see it in someone else, where you witness their potential for kindness or grace or wisdom embodied. But you see their actions are going sideways, have become confused. Soften your heart also to that condition that arises so frequently for humans. Thank you, everyone. You may open your eyes as you're ready to. So, while the storyline in the Bhagavad Gita is that Arjuna and his brothers had been sent away and they were in exile or on retreat, in the forest studying, sometimes we encounter despondency in contemporary life from a very different place. They were off studying consciousness and getting more deeply committed to their practices and making their bodies and minds and hearts more available to yoga. But sometimes what happens in modern life is that we fall asleep only to be awakened by really tragic information. And that kind of can shock you out of your, what we call sleep in yoga is also ignorance. It can shock you out of that slumber to realize things are very bad. In some places on the planet and some parts of our culture, things are tremendously bad, quote unquote bad. They are being ruled by adharma, the absence of wisdom, or the absence of clarity. I'm not a person who's particularly sleepy about such things, but you can only take in so much information about what's going wrong in the world. And so sometimes I'm shocked by information I hadn't had my ear to the ground about. And I was recently watching a TED Talk in a series called Chew on This. So it's a whole series of TED Talks about the food industry. And this woman who was talking faster than Jay or I were comfortable with, but was very passionate and very spot on with these numbers and facts and figures and comparisons. She had only like 12 minutes to talk, so she was getting a lot put into a short amount of time. She shared some statistics that had that awakening quality to it for me, where I could feel my own despair and helplessness about what to do, how to make a difference. She's been a lunch lady, as she called herself, for the last 2 years in California. She serves lunches to kids. And she said, I'm quoting her now, she said that the numbers of pesticides in food, as she's been studying the average person's consumption of food in the average sorts of foods in America, that people are consuming 5 gallons of pesticides a year. That's really scary. She's looking at the sorts of foods that children are fed in the school system and the kinds of illnesses that they're having. And she reported that, according to statistics, children will live less long lives than their parents. The current generation of children will live less long lives, and that the potential percentage of young people with diabetes for Caucasians was 1 to 3 for these children, and for people of color was 1 in 2. That turns out to be 45% of children with juvenile diabetes. Or what is this called when you get diabetes from food? This is type 2 diabetes, excuse me. That's a very high prevalence of people not feeling well and therefore not being able to learn and or then contribute to their community as they're going through the school system and becoming citizens. So this particular dilemma, she went on to say, a couple more stats I have to give you because it's that sort of cold air in your face shock that you get sometimes. She said, we spend $35,000 a year on incarcerating an inmate and $500 a year on feeding a school child lunch. That was shocking to me. I'm in the prison community. I teach in the prison system. I know what the budgets are there. I see the discrepancies. I also see really good things happening as more volunteers enter the prison industry to help make things better there. But I have not had my ear to the ground about the school lunch program. So when I heard those numbers, it was very despairing to me. She also said there are 2.1 criminals, inmates in this country, and 1.9 farmers. 2.1 million inmates, 1.9 million farmers. So we have more inmates than we have farmers. That was also shocking. So when you have something like that where you've been a little asleep or unaware and then it comes at you, you can experience the kind of despair that Arjuna experienced when he met up with his Dharma on the battlefield. Now, in the Gita, it's interesting that the first teachings that his teacher gives him are about coming to a more clear mind. The teachings of Jnana Yoga, Jnana, Jnana Yoga, the teachings of self-knowledge, of understanding the self, meaning the big self, not the small self with your particular likes and dislikes. Like, I like almonds, I don't like olives. That's relatively unimportant in the concept of the big self. But Arjuna is talking to his teacher, and he's not first told about the path of love and devotion. He's not first told about meditation or action. He's first told about self-knowledge. And he admits, in the early part of chapter 2 in the Gita, Arjuna admits that his mind is out of balance. He doesn't say it that clearly, but you understand that's what he's referring to, that his mind is out of balance, and he goes to his teacher and he says, okay, I submit I put my life in your hands, tell me what to do. He then becomes restless about what his teacher suggests, so you can understand there's a process involved. But in that despair, when we feel it ourselves very viscerally, like you might feel suddenly thirsty, or your heart rate goes up, or your hair stands up, or you get goosebumps, or you feel your heart break. That's the quality of despondency that Arjuna was also facing. And his teacher said, let's stabilize your mind. Let's help you to find out who you actually are and what you're meant to have come through you in this lifetime. And Arjuna was trained as a warrior. He was born into a warrior caste. He was trained to be a warrior for the Dharma. So he doesn't actually get to decide to then be a plumber. It's not set up that way. He doesn't get to then decide to be a historian or a musician. He's going to be a warrior. He is struggling with that in that moment, but I have a hunch that those of you who are here tonight, you understand that sometimes life chooses your Dharma, you don't choose it yourself. It's a kind of thing you can't say no to, and it asks you, it compels you to keep taking the next step forward. That's Arjuna's Dharma, to take the next step, though he's momentarily halted by his own despair. Have you guys experienced this juncture in your life? Maybe once.
Yeah.
More often than once. Yeah. And what did you do? How did you respond? Yes,
cried
Maddie.
a lot.
Is it?
Yeah, I've just gone through a really hard time. So, yeah.
Crying.
Cry.
Mm-hmm. And meditating.
And meditating. Yeah, and reaching out to friends that have wisdom and being around you and learning how to say things so someone can hear you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, getting out of your fear and trying to be calm.
Mm-hmm. That's one of the essential things that Arjuna is going to hear from his teacher, actually, is that we can't sit in fear and despair. We want to get your mind to be clear so we can take the next step. And I think crying is a really important avenue to clearing your mind. I celebrate a good cry. I do. Yes. Maddie?
Yeah, I would say something really similar, that sometimes I think it's really challenging to figure out what the next step would be, and you can't figure that out when you're like in that sort of place of despair. So yeah. Trying to do things to clear your mind and restore that so you have better insight.
Yeah. If the mind is really vacillating or disturbed, we call 5 states of mind in the Yoga Sutras: disturbed, dull, distracted, one-pointed, and lucid. If you're in disturbed or dull, it's pretty hard to allow clear choices to come through you. If you're in distracted, you're a little closer to one-pointed. If you're in lucid mind, it's far better to feel what's going to come through as intuition, as wisdom, as the Dharma asking itself to come through you. And if we are wise enough to know we're in disturbed mind, which is where Arjuna is right now, that's already amazing. To say, I'm too disturbed to make a decision right now, and I need to reach out for help. What else did you do in that juncture?
Sat with the fear,
Mm-hmm.
and then said yes.
Uh-huh. Yeah. There are many quotes about that from all over the centuries and places on the planet, that people have sat with fear. Something happens, and then you get to say yes.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Wendell Berry says this when he says, I go among trees and sit still. All my stirrings become quiet around me like circles on water. My tasks, they lie in their places, asleep where I left them, like cattle in the field. Then, what I'm afraid of comes, and lives for a while in my sight. It sings, and I hear its song. The fear of it leaves me. Then what is afraid of me comes, and lives for a while in my sight. What it fears in me leaves me. I sing, and it hears my song. And if I got a couple words wrong, I apologize to Wendell Berry, but you understand the essence. He's saying, I go among these trees, I sit still, and in the process of sitting still, the fear actually can have a relationship. You can have a relationship with it. And then the fear may change to something like a yes. You can take action. Yeah.
I think in the past I would often turn to people to talk to them, and it would take me away from being able to sit with the anxiety and the the distraught. And then gradually, as I built more skill, less often do I go to people in that sort of, I guess, disturbed state.
Yeah.
And I'm more often able to be in the field and process myself. And then when I do go to people, it's more in a different way.
Yeah. That's a real sign of growth, because, Arjuna's coming back with his brothers to encounter the 99 others. Let's call them the others for right now. But he doesn't ask them for guidance. He asks his teacher. So he goes to like a higher source of wisdom, a more objective, more truth-telling source. But of course, sometimes in our early attempts to find solace or understanding or direction, we may go and take our despair to talk to somebody who will collude with us about how despairing it actually is, and we don't end up having action while we get some connection here. We may not actually get traction towards the action steps that we need. And we can dissipate our anxiety that way too by talking to somebody about it, and it can seem all better suddenly. And then we say, oh, it's not so horrible. No action is needed. But then we fall back to the same symptomology. And fortunately, the anxiety comes back. Blessedly, it returns. So that restlessness underneath, I think, is a blessing, because it's provoking you to find more clear action. So when Arjuna comes back and he sees these people across the field, and the first yoga he's learning from his teacher is to know himself. The teacher says you can't know yourself without a clear mind. I'm going to ask you to do a little writing or picture exercise about the 99 others plus one, the one who has the urge for psychological battle. So it looks like this. I'm going to use this grease board for a moment. Excuse me. So if you were to picture the circle of yourself like this, you're a little bit squarish of a circle right now, and you had, this is not an Easter egg, and it's not a Charlie Brown picture. His shirt looked like that, the Charlie Brown shirt. If you were to picture those things that you already know about yourself, some aspects of yourself that you already know and you admire, you celebrate, you feel they're helpful in your dharma, like maybe your ability for compassion, or your ability to pause, to get still, for example. And then you were to picture aspects of yourself that you feel more restless about, your urge for road rage. I don't know if that happens to anybody, or your urge for other people to be better individuals, or your judgment about them, whatever that might be. And under here represents what we don't know. What we don't know, what we can't see, what might be in our blind spot. I'll ask you about this in a different way after we do the first exercise. So if you could make a couple notes, you don't have to be exhaustive about it, but it'd be helpful to have a sense of what you already know serves your dharma, the qualities, maybe you've developed them, maybe they were innate in you and they got seen by your parents or your community and you got to keep those innate qualities, like your sense of lightheartedness. Or maybe it's your thoughtfulness, your ability to put thought into your study and to stick with it. The middle section here is for those aspects that you know about, but they're kind of restless and they distract you from your dharma. They pull you away from it. So we'll spend a few minutes writing. take about 2 more minutes to write. And then you can finish up the thought that you're working on there, and I'll call you back up to the board here. Did you have any surprises about what you wrote? You're generally in the more, not less self-aware community here, so I'm guessing you didn't have big surprises about what you wrote. But I'd like to sort of document, for the purpose of our learning, what kinds of things did you come up with that support your Dharma? These are the qualities that you know about yourself are helpful, they're auspicious, they promote the experience of Dharma in you. What did you come up with?
Using
Compassion.
non-judgment.
Non-judgment?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. What did you say there, Suzanne?
Compassion for others. Compassion.
Mm-hmm. Okay, others? Spirituality. Mm-hmm.
Patience.
Patience.
Consistency.
What did you say, Annie?
Consistency.
Consistency and
Motivated.
motivated. Okay. Okay. Yes, Jennifer? Empathic. Mm-hmm.
Usually honest.
Did you say honest?
Honest. Yeah.
Honesty, yeah. Humor, did you say? Yeah.
Presence, present moment living.
Presence.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what I got? Yeah.
Openness.
Mm-hmm.
Curiosity.
Mm-hmm. You know, what's interesting to me about that is that Krishna in this story is the great teacher, and in other stories he's the impish little boy who's stealing butter from his mother. And he has, in other stories, he has hundreds of gopis chasing after him. He is a very playful character, in fact, and yet also steeped with this wisdom that he's imparting on his student. Do you know the story of Krishna as the butter stealer? Yeah. Anything else?
Kindness.
Kindness. Okay, so I have one more tiny space here. What shall we say?
Loyalty.
Faith and loyalty, is that what you got? Okay, faith, you put here.
Is it okay for us to write some of these down once we've been reminded of qualities?
Yeah, borrow them, please borrow them. Okay, and so what happened with the non-dharmic? We would say it like this, adharmic, so you say asteya, aparigraha, ahimsa means the absence of. So we say adharma means the absence of dharma. Asteya means the experience of stealing. So aparigraha, the experience of grasping. So it's aparigraha is non-grasping, asteya is non-stealing. The absence of stealing, the absence of grasping. This is the absence of dharma. What are these expressions like for you?
Self-critical.
Mm-hmm.
Fear.
Ego.
By that, do you mean like attachment or agenda or?
Self-aggrandizement, or
Does it ever go the opposite way?
sure, yeah, both.
Okay. Just checking. I've known Jeff for some time, so I knew the answer to that question. Because you told me.
Rumination.
What's that?
Rumination.
Rumination, okay.
Stagnation.
Stagnation, yeah.
Isolation.
Judgment.
Did I hear judgment?
Impatience.
Yes, the impatience.
Control.
Stubbornness and control, did I hear that?
Control.
Okay. Was control yours?
Mhm.
Who said stubbornness?
I do.
Meadow said that? Wow. I have a little surprise there. I didn't know. Stubbornness, okay.
Procrastination.
Okay, procrastination and,
I had grief-stricken and also paralysis by analysis.
okay, all right. So, procrastination,
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant grief-stricken
Yeah.
and analysis or
paralysis by analysis, yeah. Grief-stricken. And paralysis by analysis, now known as PBA. It's easier for me to write that one that way. Anything else that you want to add?
I just thought for me, it was much easier to come up with those than the first question.
Mm-hmm.
That flowed out of me.
That's something
Good
to have a
that
little
way.
despair about, actually.
Mhm.
And my hunch is that that's not a new realization for you, but if you were to tell a teacher, let's say when I had the experience now of being with teachers who are from the East who didn't have the Western culturalization, they're always shocked to hear how badly Westerners feel about themselves. And I think it's a healthy shock that we have this storyline about feeling badly about ourselves, so that you could come up with these much
Quicker. I was like, oh yeah.
more quickly and
I
more
had to really-
numerously, perhaps. That's an important realization. Yeah.
personalizing things or taking things personally.
Mm-hmm. Okay, personalizing. And any other thing that wants to be added here?
Well, catastrophizing.
What is it?
Catastrophizing.
Oh, catastrophizing. All right. And Jaya?
I couldn't think of the right word for it, so maybe you can help me, but fear or discomfort with conflict.
Mm-hmm. My husband was just here co-teaching. He's a psychologist. We call it conflict avoidance
Yes.
as a style.
Okay.
Okay. And catastrophizing, I heard also. Okay, so I don't have great handwriting, but you understand I'm making notes for this particular purpose. This actually represents the gunas in the Bhagavad Gita. So what is here in the unknown, and this Eknath Eswaran refers back to Carl Jung when he's talking about tamas, T-A-M-A-S, means the quality that is inert and stable and could be grounded, but it's also that quality that puts us back to sleep. Tamas is associated psychologically with sleepiness, forgetfulness, ignorance, and what Carl Jung called the repository of the unconscious of the human mind, that collective repository of things that we don't wish to know. So this represents tamas down here. Carl Jung was a phenomenal force in our world for helping us to explore the shadow, to explore what is hidden in tamas here. And someone who I also respect a lot, James Hollis, has a phrase where he's talking about the otherness of the other. And he says about the otherness of the other, he says, it's a call for us to be accountable to that in the other that makes us uncomfortable, to become accountable to that, to become in relationship with that, to reintegrate the otherness of the other. So this area down here, representing tamas, And that ignorance is also the 99 brothers across the battlefield, 99 cousins and family members across the battlefield. Some of them are represented by the tamasic element of human existence. And that which we don't know, we usually feel some fear about coming to know. Humans have stored things in the shadow collectively for a long time. And some of that we are just born into the cultural habituation of. So I like to say again that our restlessness can be very helpful, because if you're born into a collective forgetfulness, but you actually feel restless about something, you might be a person who's going to wake up a shadow element and bring it to the light, where we can learn to understand and relate to it. For a long time, people who were left-handed were considered frightening. Did you know this? Why were they considered frightening?
They were different. Yeah.
Because they were different. And does anybody else know why? About the brain?
Oh yes, they were considered to have more access to the right hemisphere.
Yeah. And the right hemisphere of the brain was considered to be more about the gloomy, dark, stormy aspects of human consciousness, the more anxious, the more mysterious. And so people who were left-handed had an apparent greater connection to the right hemisphere of the brain, and they were getting trained out of being left-handed to being right-handed, to come back to the left brain world. And actually, if you're a left-handed person and you walk about the world, you see it's a right-handed world here in America. Doorknobs and so on. You're a lefty, right? Yeah. Have you experienced that?
Yes,
It's a right-handed world.
especially in
definitely.
sports.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And in the guitar.
Instruments
And the
sports,
violin.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that experience of feeling frightened of what we don't know, that goes back eons for humans. Like the earth is flat, we're going to fall off the edge, so we're terrified of the edge. So what we put into the shadows is that which we are often frightened of, and we can keep it hidden there with this tamasic undertow, which shows up as stagnation or resistance or aversion, turning away from, or clouding over. It's pulling the blanket over your head and giving up, as it were, turning more towards darkness than towards light. And I don't mean this as a darkness is bad and light is good. I mean turning more towards that which is hidden and not turning as often towards that which is willing to show itself. This middle spectrum here, this adharmic, as you look at these qualities, these are the qualities of rajas, out of balance. And they are also represented across the battlefield by the cousins and others in this battle. So these things stir your rajasic mind to an out-of-balance rajas. Rajas could be motivation, which we had up here. Rajas could be consistency, which we had right here. Rajas could be the force that you gather, like riverbanks are gathering a river, sending it towards the ocean. It could be that force. But we hear in the Gita that the human mind is heavily driven by its senses, its manas, M-A-N-A-S, its senses. And with that here, rajas moves out of balance when we are sense-indulgent. This is the phrasing, sense-indulgent. It means when we're driven by the senses like wild horses. You all have heard, I've said, and Jeff was with Saraswati when she said, one of my teachers over in India, she's in Chennai, she likes to describe the human mind like a drunken monkey stung by a scorpion haunted by ghosts. That is a rajasic mind. So each of these qualities, if you invest in them, will push you further into rajas, which goes then horizontally, not vertically, where you could ascend towards the sattvic qualities. So up here, this is the sattvic. And in the Gita, we actually learn that there are 26 qualities in a sattvic person. I think we have about 18 or 20 of them up here. They're very specific qualities described in the Gita. We'll talk about it on Sunday. I think it's on Sunday. But so here you have tamasic, rajasic, and sattvic. Do you understand the design? So Krishna says to his student, Arjuna, we have to get to know your mind and bring it into clarity. Bring it towards a more sattvic mind, and you'll see the wisdom with which I'm teaching you. You'll see the vision very clearly. Well, of course, he doesn't see the vision promptly. I said this last month, he's a little bit petulant, and Arjuna keeps asking his teacher to explain things differently or better, or he's almost like a student saying, you said it was A, now you're saying it's B, would you just get it right? Because he hears about Jnana Yoga, then he has to hear, he's listening through Karma Yoga, the yoga of action, and then he's going to listen to the yoga of meditation, Raja Yoga. And he's now got 3 systems before him, and he's getting, you could imagine, cross-armed over the chest, like, well, which is it? He's also longing for his teacher to show himself to him. And at this point in the story, after the 3 kinds of yoga, his teacher finally reveals what he looks like. And Arjuna, as you know, he's first delighted that his teacher is revealing himself. He has an incredible vision. This is like when you've had a really good crying jag, for example, and some wisdom emerges and you say, oh, yes. It's like a bigger wisdom than your own IQ, and it's bigger than your personal life, and it expands your heart, and you just have this big sense of yes and grace. And then Krishna keeps revealing himself, and Arjuna says, okay, that's fine, I've seen what I want to see, please put it back. Because what he also starts to see in his teacher is the expression of what's not so fabulous in life. He sees first the brilliance of thousands of blazing suns, then he sees the destruction of humanity and death and dying and so on. He sees the vision, as it's called. He has a revelation. So he says to his teacher, okay, put that back. I don't want to see that anymore. And sometimes I liken that to the moment we have this like grace-filled awareness, and we walk out of that grace-filled awareness into relationship to live that awareness, and we shrink back from it. So, oh, actually that's pretty difficult to put into action. And we say, no, I'll just put that insight away. I'm going to put it away for a little while until I can use that insight with the right person at the right time in the right circumstances. I'll just store it for a little while. And that will cause you to be restless again. Have you done that with your insights? So just going to store it in my pocket with my pens, right there. So what happens next in the Gita is that his teacher introduces him to the path of love and devotion. So it's considered a more difficult path than the other paths of yoga, and more easily misunderstood by Westerners. So I'll talk about that for a few moments. Let me just frame how we got here again. There was a gambling match. They lost the Dharma, the kingdom. They went into exile. They had teachings. They strengthened their spirits and their clarity. They came back. They saw things were a mess. They felt very despairing. Arjuna felt so despairing he did not want to be a warrior anymore. He was going to give it up. And yet his call was to go to battle against the 99 others across the field and do something with those qualities. His call was to go to battle against these aspects of his mind and these aspects of the human condition, and to eradicate them so the kingdom would come back to sattvic living, would come back to the Dharma. That was his task. And he talks to his teacher about these different systems of yoga and finally decides those aren't them. He sees his teacher. He then sees all the other things in the universe and he says, okay, forget it. And yet he's a little more convinced, and his teacher now says, well, here's an option. You can practice the path of love and devotion. And by that he means give everything over to God. Every thought, every action, every devotion, every moment, more to love. And they use the word Lord in the Bhagavad Gita, so we can say God or Lord or consciousness or grace. Give it over to grace with absolute commitment and consistency and dedication and devotion. Practice the path of love, which isn't to say the path of emotionality. That's where it gets misunderstood by Westerners, because then we've heard teachings and we've interpreted them to suit our conditioning. So let's imagine, for example, that we are a person wearing a pair of glasses and we think they're very clear, we're looking through them, but they have many colored lenses in them that we've become accustomed to. So with our glasses, we see the world as we see it. And yoga practice or meditation practice might take one colored lens off and we start seeing the world differently. And yet we have many other films between us and the world as it is. Another lens falls away, another color dissolves, and we see, oh, and more we're waking up to what we actually could see very clearly. And the practice of love and devotion is to that clarity, to that grace. But we misunderstand when we're wearing all of our lenses. We say, oh, it's to indulge my emotions. That's the path of Bhakti Yoga. Because I'm the emotional sort, this must be my path. Has anybody had this misunderstanding? I actually think Jennifer said earlier, empathic. And a number of students have talked to me about this over the years, that when you're an empathic sort of person, when you feel the emotions of others, and you can easily get overwhelmed and feel very porous about what's happening within or around you, you could harness that porousness for the path of Bhakti Yoga. But you're also at risk of that path being something very turbulent, where your emotions are always all over the place, and you find yourself going back to despondency, talking to Arjuna, who says, clear your mind, please, clear your mind. And then try these other paths where actions come through you, and you understand they're larger than you. And then meditate and spend time understanding the nature of the cosmos, and then practice love and devotion, which is a more difficult path because of the human mind's urge to live in its sense tendencies. This is considered more challenging down here, the Bhakti Yoga path. You understand how I'm describing that? As they're actually in stages. And if you were swirling about in your emotionality and your teacher said, please clear your mind, would that sound like wise action to you? Now let me ask you this. When you're having an argument with your beloved, and your beloved says, could you please clear your mind? Does that sound like wise action to you right there? Why is that different? That's not a rhetorical question, it's a genuine question. Why is it different?
I think for most of us, we can identify more with an argument with our lover than with Krishna.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the difference could also be that, I mean, in when you're working with your relationship with another, and here you're working with your relationship to yourself or to the world as a whole. Which is,
well, the world as a whole is a lot of people.
well, yes, it is, but it's not as specific and as interconnected in that general sense, I guess.
Yes, Annie?
I think it's because those glasses are on in that moment of hearing that, because the way you said it, I'd like to think, please, if my husband said that in that moment, please, because he'll say it in a different way, mostly, right? Or I'll say it in a different way, mostly.
Yeah.
But if he were to say it in the way you said it, which was very pure and loving, and I can't hear it, it's because of the glasses that I have on, to not be able to hear. The isolation is my, I'm pulled so far into myself that I can't hear it. I can't open to it. My bandwidth is so closed down.
Yes, and of course you're having an interpersonal dynamic. And one of the really important things to understand, there's two I'll say. So Krishna represents our inner teacher. There is the need for the outside teacher, an objective, supportive guide, a spiritual mentor in your life. I think particularly helpful here in the West, where our culture is so rajasic and so tamasic, so rarely sattvic. And the second thing that we have to keep remembering is that we have a fundamental programming about feeling threatened by a close other with whom we rely on for our survival, our sense of love or connection or being seen and held. There is a fundamental biological, neurological imperative that we don't threaten that connection and that we don't feel threatened by it. So when you get into an argument right there with your beloved and they say, please clear your mind, you may be more attached to your rajasic state and want them to understand it and get it and respond to it and love it and embrace it. Maybe you want them to play the role of the empath who can hold space. And they may need the same thing from you at the same time. So that conflict makes it difficult to resolve. And if both people said simultaneously, let's clear our minds, it would probably go better. So if both people had a devotion to a Bhakti Yoga commitment to coming back to love and grace, and then resolving the discord, it would be a different outcome. Yes. With Jennifer and then Nicole.
I was just going to say, in that moment of whether it's a beloved or one of any close people, and if it's a heated moment, it's likely to feel like judgment.
Yeah.
Oh, they're judging me. Oh, and it's that what you were talking about. I guess that imperative of it's threatened or they're looking down on me, or
Yeah. I think the ways in which we can feel threatened, we have to include judgment for the feeling of not being seen or understood or felt by an other. As I've said before, and this is in this training and other contexts, you're born dependent on somebody feeling you and getting you. Just to know when you're hungry or thirsty or cold or too hot or tired or overstimulated. Because you have really little to no agency of your own, except to hold something with fingers that are learning to hold, and to make eye contact with eyes that are learning to focus on the world, or to gaze avert when you feel overwhelmed. You have very little capacity, and you're utterly reliant on, vulnerable to other people getting that. So that when judgment surfaces in any of its forms, like anger or rage or disappointment or criticism, it can feel very terrifying fundamentally. Fortunately, it can also become a source of yogic practice to work with that. We'll talk about that in a moment. Nicole?
On very similar lines, it just dawned on me that, like, when you hear those words from someone you've accepted as a teacher, it sounds more loving. And if you haven't accepted whoever you're having the conflict with has the potential to teach you something, it just feels very patronizing.
Yes, yeah.
I've had the best outcomes in my conflicts with my spouse when I've actually said, is there something I can learn from him or from this moment?
And do you verbalize that to him as well?
I do, but he's just... oh, that's just whatever. That's cute. So.
Yeah. Because many of you in this room are yoga teachers or yoga therapists in training and yoga teachers. I'm curious if you've ever had this experience, which I had the good fortune to have more than a decade ago. I'm thinking how old am I? At least 15 years ago, where I was involved with somebody romantically who would occasionally say to me, well, aren't you a yoga teacher? Like while we're having a conflict. The assumption being, use your yogic practices now. We're having a conflict. Aren't you like a yoga teacher? And what's that?
It's your superhero power.
Yeah, use your yogic superhero powers. And I say I had the good fortune to experience it because, in fact, it was patronizing. And I got to realize this person wasn't on my team. He wasn't a practitioner of yoga, so it was a good time to part ways in this case. Because conflict can be something that produces hopeful outcomes. Like this whole story, the Bhagavad Gita, is a battle, literally. So conflict is not to say it shouldn't be happening. Friction is a part of tapas, like I often say, that which has been, that which could be, rubbing together until the friction produces a different outcome. So we can use it, we can embrace it. Our first instinct is to push against it. Go ahead.
I was going to say, so with someone who's not like your, the loving of your life, say someone that you're working with, or a student, or client, whatever that is, it is loving to have some distance where we're not riding on our emotions.
Yeah.
But to think of learning somebody else's point of view that we may not ever agree with, but to understand it and listen to it. I mean, it's hard to do if you're close to someone like that sometimes because they're emotional about their point of view. But so understanding their point of view without judgment is just to try to get a picture of what that is, maybe from their, because they were raised in a different way, from a different part of the world.
Well, when we have our lenses on and we're looking at the other as the other, we will inevitably have conflict and we'll feel more rajasic about things. When we look through the lens of the sattvic perspective, the other is no longer the other, but an aspect of ourselves. Something to be understood. Something not to be, I don't like the word so much, even though this is the story of the battle, but I like more the feeling of reintegrating this aspect. I don't have to shun it, reject it, condemn it, belittle it, deny it, but that actually in reintegrating something like your urge for envy, when you're able to welcome that back home as an acknowledged part of your human condition, its power lessens. So if you think of this analogy where rivers are going into the ocean, and the ocean is already full. How does a river get absorbed by the ocean? That's a sattvic experience. This is an analogy about the sattvic heart. Like, the ocean is already full. Here comes another river. It's a tributary. It might be the feeling of envy. It lands in the ocean. It gets absorbed. It doesn't have more power than ocean. Ocean is relatively stable as a force. And these rivers come into it. I know there's an evaporation process. You don't have to teach me about the science of that right now. This is going on the metaphor. But it is to say the more full, expansive heart, when you integrate this quality, let's say envy, for example, and you welcome it back as this is a part of my human expression and my human condition, and I have compassion for it in myself, and when I see it in others, I can also have compassion for it. It has a lot less power over you. But when we make certain expressions bad or wrong, or unlikable or unworthy, or insurmountable, or rejectable, they have a lot more power over us. We'll be in conflict. As you said, conflict avoidance is a difficulty here. In the Rajasic mind, to avoid conflict, we have to be able to dart it back and forth and compromise ourselves to stay away from it. So I'm recommending the path of Bhakti Yoga as the path of love and wide open acceptance. Like when they say in Bhakti Yoga, keep seeing the Lord in everything, give it all over to God, see God in everything. You can even see God in the envy. You can see consciousness trying to find its way through the human heart, even when the heart is petty. Still assume consciousness is trying to do something there. You keep seeing that bigger force behind the smaller expression. Do you understand what I mean by that? It's okay. Nobody said pettiness or envy here. Is that just me? All alone? Also, the experience when you're practicing on a regular basis and these Rajasic inclinations arise, the experience of compassion towards yourself when they arise is much more natural. It really surfaces, like your heart softens towards it. And the seeds of pettiness or envy or conflict avoidance or ego or self-criticism, the seeds get less inclined to blossom. In meditation, it's actually recommended that we practice until we burn the seeds, which means they can't grow again. So you burn the seed of envy, it dissolves. Or you burn the seed of pettiness, it dissolves. Or the seed of impatience, and it can't be planted in the garden of your heart anymore. Seeds can go dormant and then get planted and reawaken, but seeds that have been burned cannot grow again. Did you know this? So that's why they call meditation the practice of burning the seeds. Any questions before I have another writing assignment for you? Or comments, anything to share? I imagine you came hoping for something, so your contributions will help that outcome. I'm being that clear and all your needs are getting met? Amazing. Okay, so I'm going to give you another writing assignment then. So I'll make another picture here, so if you wanted that one, I hope you saw it long enough. Okay, so what I'd like us to explore now is to ask the question, to what have you been devoted? And I'm going to ask you not to write it down right now, but to consider it really. To what have you been devoted is like, and how do you spend your time? So this is a question of honesty. I just saw you roll your eyes. Are you all right? So if this was your life in slices of pie, I'm going to ask you to note how you spend your time, what you commit to. And for example, I'll just put one up here that looks like an American life. Materialism.
TV.
Okay, TV. Make a bigger slice of pie over here. TV. Okay, materialism and TV. So you can name what the quadrants or the pie slices stand for, and I'm going to ask you to assume a percentage of time that you also commit to that. This is how important it is to you. This is how much time you've committed to it. Let's say with TV.
Are those the same thing, or those are two different things?
Let's say this is how important TV is to somebody, and they commit this much time to it. Well, I guess TV is not that important to them, actually. So if you're going to say on your slices here, if you're going to say, I'm really devoted to peace, to world peace, but I spend this much time on it. You might not be in integrity with yourself. Do you understand the exercise? So we'll spend a few minutes. Did you want to say how much time you spend on TV?
No, but in recent research, it's 5 hours per day per week, or 5 hours per day is the average American.
Oh my gosh.
And the average American spends 11 hours a day in front of a screen.
Oh wow.
So, including phones and tablets.
Yeah, so let's imagine if somebody like that is taking this test and they say, my biggest commitment, my biggest slice of pie is to compassion. But they have 11 hours a day occupied by that. We have to ask, how are we spending our time cultivating those values to which you want to be most devoted, the things to which you want to most contribute your life, your bhakti.
So these are like life values that we're devoted to, not activities.
Put your life values in and then see how much time you dedicate to them. Yeah. I put up the American value when I put up materialism. We'll spend another minute or so writing and coloring. Is that a good circle? Must have been wearing my glasses for this one. So for those who'd like to know more about the gunas, that was a topic I discussed last month, and there is a recording available of that. It's from our weekend on yoga and social justice. So that was March 28th, I think. Was that a Friday? 27th, March 27th. I discussed the gunas in that night's Dharma talk. So, and I went into much more detail than I did this evening because I was just pointing out the qualities of the mind. The text of the Gita that teaches the gunas, I think, is really important and very relevant in today's modern life as we pursue the spiritual path. So I'm curious what you got from that and what I might be able to borrow from your exercise there on your pages. Were there surprises? Were there affirmations? What's happening, Jennifer?
One thing I was happy with is that I know, like, I'm very devoted to my family, and there is a lot of time spent with family and real connection time.
Okay.
But I also
How big can I make this?
How big? I had a hard time divvying it up. I don't know.
Okay.
But a good chunk. But I spend a lot of time avoiding what makes me anxious, like homework procrastination or things that I have to do. I notice a lot of time and energy. It could be other activities, but what's really happening is I'm finding something else to avoid what really needs to be done. But for some reason, I don't want to do it. I think I spend a lot of energy there.
So is part of that time spent in family when you're avoiding homework?
Some of it might be, actually. Yes, some of it might be. Where we, and it's easier for me to say, oh, well, yeah, let me take this family time. And I don't have to do the homework or respond to all those emails.
Are you talking about your yoga therapy homework?
Yoga teacher some of that, and then other things that keep piling up on top of the yoga teacher training homework.
So I know you're very dedicated to yoga, so I'm going to put that over here. How much, if this is the amount of family time that you spend here, about how much time are you getting to spend on your yoga? I don't mean teaching yoga.
Yeah, the family time on my personal yoga has come down a lot, especially since Ezra was born.
Yeah. That makes sense?
Yeah.
So what about the yoga that's your personal yoga? It could be the yoga of action or contemplation or giving it over to God, or like karma yoga we talked about last month, that the process of parenting is a karma yoga, an act of selflessness. In fact, did you know that estrogen in the female body promotes us being more interested in other people's needs than our own?
Interesting. I have too much estrogen right now. I do.
Yeah. So it might be an important phase in life right now where you have a different expression of yoga. Let's call this karma yoga, and say how much time can you contribute in this way, and see your yoga practice actually happening, not being put aside.
I do feel that.
So this is parenting, and also time with your pranayama. But there's something happening about your homework.
I know.
Like a big blind spot here. So
it's blind, but not so blind. But
okay,
trying,
you know
trying
it.
To be
Yeah,
blind.
Yeah. It's not blind because you know it's happening. But,
yeah.
And this kind of exercise makes it more stark, more obvious to you.
Yeah, I didn't want to fill out the circle. I had an immediate, oh no. How do I spend my time? Yeah, what am I? Because I've kind of diffused a little bit of my excuses. Because for a long time I spent a lot of time on excuses for why I couldn't do that, especially being a parent, and why it's so this and that. And some of it was real, but a lot of it is just avoidance.
So part of your life was dedicated to excuses, and you spend a lot of time with that. And while doing that, I'm going to imagine that some of this got less attention.
Because then the anxiety of that avoidance, or it cuts into the real karma yoga of being with family, because there's this distraction.
Yeah. Yeah, so maybe there was a little more time dedicated to the excuses. You didn't want to fill it out, but you're willing to talk about it.
Just called on me. It was the twinkle in my eye.
It was.
Yeah.
It was a mixture of pouty face and eye twinkle.
Yes.
Yeah. Were there any others? Yes, Abby.
One thing that surprised me that I hadn't really thought much about are friendships. That it only my close friendships are really only getting a very, very small slice of my pie, and of that slice, only a very small portion of my time is spent there. So it's something that really wasn't on my radar that much. And I also have young children, so family is for me half of the pie, and a really big part of that, of just householding. What goes with keeping family healthy.
And that's a great devotion to have, because in fact, just as I was saying to Jennifer, in your same circumstance, that can be your karma yoga and your bhakti yoga. For every gesture that you make, you could see, as they would say in some traditions, you would see Ram, or you would see Sita for Sarah. But you would see God indwelling, that you're serving that. And therefore your bhakti yoga practice is happening as a karma yoga expression. Yes. And also to realize that sattvic friendships are very important to your, in my experience as a contemporary urban-dwelling yogini, sattvic friendships are very important to our resilience to stay afloat in this sort of urban chaos and keep ourselves on the path of yoga. The rajasic and tamasic friendships are not as helpful. Those sorts of companions are less auspicious right now. And so if we were to take your friendship slice out and look at it under a magnifying glass, we say, and which friends will we devote time to? Which relationships do we need to nurture right now? And are there some that don't need to be nurtured because they're not right now sattvic friendships? Any other surprises or delights about what you saw?
Well, for me it was really interesting because I've gone through, for someone who doesn't like change, more change in the last year than I probably have in my whole life. And so for me it was hard because what I used to think took my time, everything is shifting. Yes, and there was a specific catalyst that you told me I was a part of on New Year's Day a year and a half ago. Is that right? Yeah. I said something and you heard it. It came through me. I'm not taking big ownership over it, but it came through me, and you heard it, and your heart heard it, and you took action. So that's where insight became action.
Right.
And we can see that sometimes insight becomes action, and life can become a little bit turbulent, even though you're going in the right direction.
No, it was really like, oh, okay, so the things that used to be important are becoming less important. I'm taking more and more time with yoga, and instead of everything being on the outside, I'm really interested in having an inside journey. It's just, it's a big shift, big shift. So I can't really, my life's sort of like that right now. So
and you're accepting it.
Yeah, I'm welcoming it for sure. It's painful, but
there's a sort of sacred pain. So you prefer to be controlling, is that what you said?
And it's like I'm having to learn how to get out of that way, doing that. To let the good happen.
Yeah. Lovely. Yes, Maddie?
I was really interested just because, it was Jeff that said TV at the beginning, and that's not one of my life values, but I was kind of looking at it and I was trying to figure out well, what is TV cutting into, sort of? Yeah. Because I don't watch a ton of TV, but it was interesting to know what are the things that are our values that have little blank spots that I would label TV here and maybe TV over here.
Yeah.
So that was interesting.
Your sister is nodding her head. Is that on Maddie's behalf or on your behalf?
Am I responsible for her television?
No, I'm saying, no, I meant, are you nodding in recognition, or are you nodding Maddie needs to know this about herself?
No. I'm nodding in recognition of her recognition has allowed me to recognize that in myself.
You also have things that you would like to be doing that you're recognizing TV is cutting into this thing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You recognize what's getting in the way, essentially.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So this kind of, yes, Jeff.
I don't want to share too much, but so I had some important news this week, and I noticed that TV at night was one of the first things that fell out. It was really interesting. There was just no time for it.
No time for it. In fact, I was thinking of you when I chose these passages I want to finish the Dharma talk with, because we had a chance to visit yesterday. But I was going to say about this, that this is one of the tools I use as a yoga therapist in the practice of Jnana yoga, which to me as a yoga therapist means, how can I help people get to know themselves and to be really honest in the reflection, and in seeing it,
to let the mind get more still in the realization, not more aversive, nor more grasping in the realization. That grasping would show up as, I have to change this promptly, and aversive as, I'm not interested in knowing this about myself. So these sorts of tools that I just used with you tonight are part of my toolkit with my students or my clients. And Jnana Yoga is the practice of asking the questions. One of the teachers that we went to the ashram, Jeff and I went together to India. We went to Tiruvannamalai to see Ramana Maharshi's ashram. Is this a name that's familiar to anybody? Ramana Maharshi? Sometimes said as Ramana Maharshi. I don't know if it's Ramana or Ramana, because the English translation. So he was a 16-year-old schoolboy, and he had a question. His question was, what is it that doesn't die? What is it that keeps going? What doesn't end? What is not that in me that dies? And the question was so provocative and powerful to him that he, in his home where he was living with his mother, he laid on the floor asking the question until he realized that which didn't die. He awakened to his true nature as a result of the question. He's the relatively famous Jnana Yogi. Through the process of asking the question, he realized his true self. And he lived the remainder of his years as that true self. He journeyed to Tiruvannamalai, where there's a sacred mountain called Mount Arunachala. And he lived up the mountain in a cave, in deep meditation and in silence, without asking for followers or students, though people had heard of him and they went up to find him in the cave, sort of covered with ants, and not minding particularly, and then meditating. And there's a great stillness at the mountain when you go up to the cave, which also, because they burn ghee as part of the lights, I couldn't stay in the cave that long. Did you find the...
I didn't go up with you.
Oh, right, because your knee was still recovering. So in the meditation cave, the smell of ghee was a little difficult for me to stay with, so I couldn't stay in this beautiful moment that long because I have very sensitive sinuses, and there's a lot of burning ghee in India. And deep inside the underground temples where they're burning the ghee and there's no fresh air, you have to be thoughtful about what you're going to be doing. When they pour the ghee over the statues and they're in the outdoors, it's very different. But you could go to this cave where he had sat for a long time and you could feel the silence and the stillness. His mother then followed him to Tiruvannamalai, and towards the end of her life, she became his student. And towards the end of her life, when she was dying, he came down from the mountain and was willing to be a teacher to the local community, still teaching through silence and the process and the practice of inquiry. And you can go to Tiruvannamalai, to the ashram, and see where he sat on the couch that you see in the photographs of him. And you feel again this immense stillness where his presence still remains. So he was a Jnana Yogi who awakened to that which is living beyond our life, that indwelling Atman, they call it, the indwelling spirit. Jeff?
Can I add something?
Yeah.
India is so much of the differences, the contrasts, and I think Sergio and we were talking about this at the ashram most of the time that day, that some of his followers, which he didn't recruit, spent all their time pouring oils and massaging the lingam statue that represents, I guess, him in some way. And so, they've so lost track of maybe what he was offering. Mm-hmm. And it's a good example, I think, of some of this, of thinking that worshiping him is really important, but what they're really spending their time doing is something that's really detached and from awareness. And
yeah, India is a potpourri of humanity and worth seeing, and we're going in December if you want to come with us. We're not going back to Tiruvannamalai on this trip because it didn't fit in the itinerary, but we're going to amazing places. I'll tell you more about it another time. But that quandary and that paradox, we saw it all the time. In every moment in India you can see this paradox, and you have the practice of Bhakti Yoga to still see the divine in what you're looking at, to see the God being expressed through this moment too, and to see the indwelling spirit even in confused actions or confused understandings. And sometimes we got to also see very, very starkly our own rajasic and tamasic natures. India is a good place to have a meltdown. Really. And maybe you can say also a good place to burn the seeds like the seeds of pettiness or the seeds of envy. You can burn those pretty well in India. You see how precious, how vulnerable, how temporary lives are, and how devoted the culture of India, those who are practicing, how devoted they are amidst what we would otherwise think of as filth and poverty and despair. There's this incredible devotion. And the Western mind may have a hard time wrapping itself around that. But rather than wrapping around it, just let the mind break open, and then you're represented in that indwelling spirit. You can feel it and see it. So this comes from Swami Rama's translation of the Bhagavad Gita, who wrote a psychologically oriented translation. He says this. This is the chapter after Bhakti Yoga. He said, after imparting the knowledge of Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of divine love, Krishna explains to Arjuna that the body is like a field that yields the ambrosial fruit. When the aspirant knows the importance of this field and knows the difference between the field and its knower, he realizes the self. It is essential to have profound knowledge of the body and to look after it with utmost care. One who knows the importance of this body and knows that it is in the possession of Atman is wise indeed. Such an aspirant uses his body as an instrument to attain the purpose of life. In this chapter, the word kshetra, which means field, is used to signify the body. It is the duty of every human being to fully know the field in the form of the body. The field is both an individual's body and the body of the Lord. And when one is realized, he is aware that the whole universe is in his body. And this about Bhakti Yoga. Bhakti Yoga is the path of love and devotion. Many students think that this is the easiest path, and many consider it to be a path of emotionalism. But that is not the case. To love and to be in love is not easy. The path of devotion and love is as difficult as the paths of Jnana and Karma Yoga. In fact, it is more difficult because it requires single-pointed devotion toward God alone, with purity of mind and heart. It is a conscious dissolution of one's individuality in the love of God. It is a conscious dissolution of one's individuality into the love of God. The path of love is full of giving without any expectation of reward whatsoever. It is not mere emotionalism, but the height of ecstasy where the lover and beloved become one and inseparable. In this path there is no duality, there is no place for two. As the river meets the ocean, they become inseparably one. So it is in the path of devotion. And that language so often confuses the Western mind. But I have a hunch that you understand what's being said. Is this the case? So let's sit with these words as understanding. You may rest your hands in your lap again. You might choose to close your eyes, or if that causes you to be more in that emotionalism, more ruminative, more inward, more isolated, then keep the eyes quietly open, aware of your companions in the room and beyond the walls of the room as well. So we hear in this part, it is our duty to know the field and to care for it utmost, such that this Dharma that is uniquely yours may come through you selflessly, and each of us may experience the dissolving of our separateness back to love. join your hands together in Anjali Mudra. Thank you, everyone. Namaste.
Namaste.